Hi, everybody, and welcome to Transplant Life's webinar. I am Maiya Hogan. I'm a registered dietitian, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's presentation. Just really briefly, I'm going to make this announcement a couple of times. After today's presentation, you're going to receive an email with a link to a survey. And that survey is really helpful for us learning about what kind of information you want to learn about in these webinars. And I love taking feedback on presentations. So I'll say this here and I'll say it at the end. Please take time to fill out that webinar survey when you get a chance. And beyond that, I want to welcome you to today's presentation. We have about 30 minutes to cover the conversation around heart healthy nutrition strategies for transplant, both a little bit pre and a little bit post. It kind of applies to everybody, which is nice. Again, if you are not familiar, I am Maiya Hogan. I'm a registered dietitian. I had the opportunity to come present back in January on goal setting, and today I get to come back and do a little bit more focus on nutrition. Before we jump in, just some quick disclaimers, remembering that this is all for educational purposes. It is not intended to replace advice from your care team. If you're looking for individualized information, those are the people to go to. We're not here to share full names. So if you have questions, comments at the end or throughout the presentation, by all means, please share them over the question box or the chat box, but don't use full names, and that includes of care providers. And just remember, this is a safe space, so no harassment of any kind or misinformation, please. And then for the presentation itself, we have a lot of objectives we're going to cover, talking about learning about why heart health is so important, understanding which foods support heart health and which may be harmful, and then helping you gain confidence in choosing heart healthy foods when you're shopping. So we have to face realities that heart disease is a pretty big problem for a large set of the population. So cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for the general population where I live in the U.S. Outside of the U.S., it's a leading cause of death in most developed countries, if it's not number one. And among transplant recipients, again, it continues to be the most frequent cause of mortality over time. Of course, heart disease encompasses a lot of different diseases, so coronary artery disease, heart failure, arrhythmias, etc. And we know that heart disease, many forms of heart disease can be mitigated, prevented, treated through good diet and lifestyle practices. But we also know that nutrition information comes from a lot of different sources, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming or confusing about what exactly you're supposed to be paying attention to. So today we're going to boil it down and talk about 4 key nutrients. And if you can pay attention to these 4 nutrients, these 4 dietary components, you're going to go a long way to helping prevent or manage heart disease. We're not going to get into like nitty gritty details about food additives and productive carcinogenic compounds. We're really going to focus on areas where the research is very clear, very sound, and we know that adjusting intake of these foods goes a long way in helping keep your heart healthy long term. And this is regardless of what type of organ transplant you are targeting or have received, right? Heart transplant, kidney transplant, lung transplant, everyone needs to pay attention to protecting their heart. So quick rundown of these nutrients. First, we have our fats, right? And this is sort of a tiered approach. There's certain fats you want to eat more of, and these are your mono and polyunsaturated fats that are coming from fish, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Now, of course, when we're thinking transplant, we're thinking cooked fish, we're thinking about washed produce, but these are great sources of these healthy, heart-healthy fats. We want to eat less of saturated fats. So these come from meats, dairy, palm oil, and coconut oil. So there are some plant sources of saturated fats that we want to pay attention to. And these, when eaten in too high a volume, can really be harmful to our cardiovascular or heart health system. And then we do not want to eat trans fats. These are created artificially by taking an oil, like a peanut oil, for example, or an olive oil, and trying to make it solid at room temperature. This is a manufacturing process that hydrogenates oils. And so when we are thinking about avoiding these foods, we're looking for avoiding hydrogenated oils specifically, or partially hydrogenated oils. There is no amount of trans fats that's safe to consume. And it's been really clear that it increases what we call sort of the harmful cholesterol and decreases the helpful cholesterol. In terms of fiber, this is something that comes from your whole grains, fruits, vegetables, seeds, dried beans and peas, and nuts. And one of the big things that dietary fiber does is keep our gut microbiome happy. If you're not familiar with that term, gut microbiome just means is referring to the organisms that live in our GI tract. So bacteria, protozoa, fungi, all sorts of community members that live in our gut and can support or harm our health depending on how we nourish them and our relationship with them. So dietary fiber is one of those things that helps the microbiome give benefit to our body, independent of our gut microbiome, and sometimes through interacting with our gut microbiome. Dietary fiber benefits heart health by helping us manage our cholesterol, balance our appetite, even out our blood sugar, and regulate our bowel movements. And those things can influence our nutrition intake. And they bleed over into not just heart health, but obviously blood sugar being diabetes management and weight management and that kind of thing. So fiber is really important. And then with sodium, we know that high sodium intake leads to high blood pressure. It manipulates our system in such a way that we have vasoconstriction, which is just tightening of our blood vessel walls, causing more pressure. It's something that can occur naturally in foods, and that's where we're less worried because it doesn't occur naturally in most foods in high amounts. It's really when we're adding it for palatability and for preservation of foods where it can become more problematic typically. Of course, there's always exceptions, right? And then high sugar and refined carbohydrate intake, these are things that can contribute to high triglyceride levels. And again, sugar is naturally occurring, so I'm not here to fear monger around things like fruit, where they're high in sugar, but it's a naturally occurring thing. I'm more concerned about the added sugars that are used again to increase the sweetness and palatability of foods. And I'm also going to give a little caveat. Sugar alternatives like sugar alcohols and non-nutritive sweeteners are not necessarily a better alternative to added sugar. We're not going to go into that in detail, but I just want you to have that in mind that replacing a lot of sugar in your diet with a lot of sugar alcohols is not necessarily going to help you in the long run. So those are the nutrients we are thinking about. And when we're thinking about, okay, how do I fit these nutrients into my diet? I need more of some, less of others. And when I think about explaining this to my patients, I think about types of fun. Now, I know you guys are not dietitians. So when I talk about food, I'm always having fun, but not everybody understands why we might be applying fun to this concept. But I'm going to just briefly introduce type 1 versus type 2 fun. And maybe you've heard of this concept before, but essentially type 1 fun is the type of fun that you get an immediate reward from. Like in the moment, it's easy, it's fun to do. It's chatting with your best friends, it's having a swing, it's going for a swim, it's playing with your kids or playing a board game on Friday night, right? It's immediately fun. Type 2 fun is not fun in the moment. And in fact, it might be really hard. It's something that challenges us and it's like a slog. We're like, why did I do this to myself? But in retrospect, when we reflect back on it, it is fun and we are proud of the achievement. We derive joy from having accomplished something. When we apply this to foods, what we're really looking for are separating it by are the foods that are immediately pleasurable versus the foods that aren't necessarily exciting to eat in the moment, but we derive a lot of benefit from. So, type 1 fun foods are your high sugar, salt, and fatty foods that are in research considered our high palatable, high reward foods. These are called high reward foods because literally our brain, when we eat them, like a cupcake, sends us reward signals immediately, a big dopamine release that says, yes, this is a delicious food to eat. But it's not really got any calorie or any like nutrients in it besides calories. And we're not getting a lot of benefit long term to our body. That's where type 2 foods come in. These are foods that we might not be that excited to eat. Our fruits, our vegetables, our whole grain bread and crackers, right? They don't give us this ultimate dopamine hit right away when we eat them, but they give back to our body. They nourish us in a way that prolongs our health. And you may or may not get that dopamine hit. And the reason I say that is because there could be a type 2 fun food that maybe you really enjoy, or you have sort of an emotional connection with that brings up good feelings for you. So type 1 foods, fun foods are those refined grains, sweet treats, and savory snacks that are laden with fat, sugar, and salt. Type 2 fun foods are the foods that have less of those additives. Your fresh produce, your whole grains, legumes, and meats that don't have the additives. And so with this kind of concept of type fun foods in mind and our nutrients of interest, we're going to take a little trip to the grocery store. So we're going to think about this in a practical approach. What do I need to do when I'm selecting my foods to eat? Or what do I need to be paying attention to? So some quick tips. And you guys have probably heard of these before, but I'm going to reinforce them because I cannot stress how valuable these things can be in getting you connected with the right foods. Number one, before you go shopping, especially if you're shopping in person versus online, make your list before you go. It can be even helpful if you're ordering groceries for delivery, which makes things so much more accessible to so many people these days. Still having a list instead of just randomly shopping, maybe what's on sale or the deals that are pushed towards you. One of the reasons I strongly advise this is grocery stores are really smart in their marketing tactics. And our food system isn't necessarily set up to push healthy foods in your face. They're really pushing things that, again, are those more high reward foods. And that brings me to my second point. So for a long time, dietitians have said things like shop the perimeter of the grocery store. And that used to be really useful. But nowadays, again, grocery stores have changed layouts and there are hidden treasures in the aisles. So yes, the produce section is on the perimeter, but so is the deli section, so is the bakery. And in those sections, you're going to find a lot of high added fats, sugars, and salts, as well as potentially harmful preservatives. And in the aisles, you're going to miss dried beans and peas, frozen produce, whole grain products, and even whole grain breads. So I do not encourage or support any longer that idea to shop the perimeter. And that's coming from someone who used to say exactly that, giving grocery store tours. And then the next thing, read food labels. Information is right there in your hand when you're shopping. And while it seems daunting to, oh, I have to read food labels, you can start by just picking a few items, like things that you have questions about to get curious. I did a quick audit. So I've been a dietitian for over a decade. I'm pretty savvy on nutrition, but I still check food labels every time I go to the grocery store. The last time I went shopping, I did a quick audit. I probably looked at 6 different food labels just as I'm curious about ingredients or new products. And then what I do anytime I find a product I like, right? I keep a list of that. I know mentally, or I write it down, products that I've looked at, checked out, and said, yep, this is good to go. And then I don't have to keep repeating the same work every time. So as you're reading food labels, keep track of the foods that fit the parameters of what you're looking for. And so, to give you a little bit of practice, we are going to do some label reading today. I'm going to highlight again, we're just skimming. I'm not doing a full label reading, detailed deep dive, right? We're going to focus on the 4 nutrients that I told you about: fats, fiber, sodium, and added sugar. And really, we're going to simplify it even further. We're going to look at making sure saturated fat is low, fiber is high, sodium is low, and added sugar is low. So basically low on saturated fat, sodium, and added sugar, higher on fiber. And we do have to pay attention to serving size. And part of the reason is food manufacturers are a bit manipulative. There are certain rules around food labeling where you don't have to claim certain ingredients in your nutrition label or certain amounts in your nutrition label if it's under a certain threshold. So you'll find that on food labels, they will often manipulate the serving size so they don't have to claim things like trans fats in their foods, and they can make the food look like it's lower calorie than it is. And of course, we're not really getting into calories today, but it's something worth being mindful of. So the first thing we're going to look at are pastas. So we're comparing here a wheat pasta to a bean pasta. And depending on what your goals are here, it might be a wash between these two. And that's okay. Sometimes you will find by reading a label, you might confirm, oh, this is actually not as bad as I thought it was, and it's okay for me to have as part of a heart healthy diet. So you can see neither of these pastas contain saturated fat. And they have the same serving size. That's important to note. No trans fats. Some sodium in your bean pasta. So 20 milligrams or 40 milligrams, depending on the serving that's being used, but still quite low. If you remember, we were looking at less than 140 milligrams for a snack food and less than 500 for a full meal. This I'd put in that category. You're looking for less than 140 because you're probably not going to eat raw pasta by itself or cooked pasta by itself. Dietary fiber is higher in the bean pasta. So you get 5 grams in the bean pasta versus 3 grams in the wheat pasta. That, depending on your fiber goals, might be a big difference. That's not horrible, but 5 grams, right, puts it in that high fiber category. Sugar content is the same, no added sugars. And then a bonus, I know we're not getting into it, but the bean pasta does have 4 grams more fiber. So it kind of packs in a little bit more nutrient density. Another good comparison are meats. These are meats in the section like raw meat, right? We're not talking about deli meats here. And these are uncooked roasts that you could purchase at the grocery store. Again, serving size is the same between these two. Not a huge difference. We're talking about beef, so it's going to be a source of saturated fat. But major differences in sodium, right? 570 in the pre-seasoned roast versus 65 in your plain roast per 4-ounce serving. And I'm not going to dive in again into all those ingredients, but again, the ingredient list is quite long in the pre-seasoned roast. So one of the things helps me remember is that it's really helpful to pick just a plain meat and then purchase it and season it at home, right? Because you can then control the flavorings and especially the sodium. Another one to be on the lookout for, because it's a bit sneaky, peanut butters. So here we have peanut butter A, saturated fats 3.5 grams, 2 grams of fiber. What's interesting about this one is 140 milligrams of sodium. So it's low sodium, but if you're going to eat 2 tablespoons only, right, and you're not including other things. And then added sugars, it's got some added sugar in there. The other thing you'll notice sneakily is it's got fully hydrogenated oils, but they say 0 grams of trans fats. And again, that's because labeling requires that if you have less than 0.5 gram of trans fats per serving, you don't have to claim it on the label. So this is the one exception where I'm going to say you can't just look at the nutrition label. I do strongly encourage you to look at the ingredient list to look for fully or partially hydrogenated oils. Comparing that to peanut butter B, which just contains peanuts and a little bit of sodium, you can see saturated fat, same because it's coming from the peanuts. Lower in sodium here, more fiber, a little bit, no added sugar, and no hydrogenated oils. One of the helpful things that you might find useful, because again, we're just kind of running through these examples in a short amount of time, is something from the American Heart Association called the Heart Check Certification. And these are foods that companies can apply for this Heart Check certification. You're looking for that symbol on their foods. And when they are approved through this certification, it means that they contain less than 6.5 grams of total fat and 1 gram or less, or 15% or less calories from saturated fat. Trans fats, it's not a great identifier because they give exceptions, like I just mentioned, to having to claim them on the label. Sodium is also controlled here, and they're also looking for beneficial nutrients like dietary fiber, protein. So basically looking for more nutrient density. Additional categories or specific requirements are also included here. And it was too much to fit into this one presentation, but I do encourage you to check out that program if you want more guidance there. And the other thing that they have curated online is a heart check digital grocery list, where you can look at brands or types of foods and see what falls under heart check. Another thing, like if you find yourself scrolling online like I do, and you're like, oh, maybe I could scroll something useful, that could be a fun thing to check out. So it's just another way to help you guide your heart healthy nutrition choices on top of adopting some label reading. And one of the things I love nowadays is because grocery shopping has gone online, we have access much more easily to nutrition labels, and they're not tiny on the package, right? You can really zoom in online and look at them that way. All right, so I see lots of good questions coming in. I just want to give my brief summary and then I'll get to your questions. So just remember that paying attention to what you can support better outcomes for your whole health picture, and that includes for your transplant and your heart health. There are simple strategies that are so effective. So you've probably heard about them for years, but they continue to be effective. Making lists and label reading go a long way to helping you take charge of your nutrition and make adjustments that are going to benefit your long-term health. If you're looking for really more detailed information, I do strongly encourage you to connect with a registered dietitian to personalize your nutrition approach, because I know, especially post-transplant, there's a lot of things priorities you need to weigh. All right, so let's turn to your question. So someone asked, what about natural sugars like honey and maple syrup? So these are still added sugars. They do contain sort of a different nutrient makeup than just like white sugar. But you need to keep in mind in terms of like blood sugar control, they're going to do the same things. And so therefore can have the same impact on triglyceride levels. So from a heart healthy standpoint, I wouldn't consider honey or maple syrup heart healthy. And that since that's the focus of the day, that's where I'll leave that. Someone said, I usually go by serving size, but it's surprising how small some servings are. That's a really good point. And again, that's sort of a manipulative approach, like especially with some of our really calorie dense, nutrient light type 1 fun foods, where like potato chips, it's 1.5 ounces, which equates to about 10 chips. Most people eat way more than 10 chips in a sitting. I'm going to call out a certain of cookies that are seasonal right now being sold at the front of stores. Their serving sizes are usually 2 to 3 cookies, but I know a lot of people who usually don't stop at that point, right? And so it can be really helpful to be cognizant of that. Someone asked if there are specific recommended brands of peanut butter versus other ones. One of the good rules of thumb, even though it's inconvenient, is to look for the stir kind of peanut butter. So the type of peanut butter that has separation of that oil usually means it hasn't had hydrogenated oils added to it, because those are added to stabilize it, to sort of emulsify everything. So you're looking for brands that have sort of that separation from oil. And there's a lot, even store brands have like the stir kind. And that's what you're looking for. It can be crunchy or smooth, but you're looking for a stir kind of peanut butter. For protein, someone asked, is animal protein versus plant protein, is there one that's more preferred? That really depends on your protein goals. We know that there's a lot of evidence supporting benefits from getting more plant forward diet. And some people will say the Mediterranean diet. I say cultural diets that really push plant forward, or your standard like vegan, vegetarian approaches. But again, that is also more of a focus on whole foods. I don't necessarily say you have to be vegan or vegetarian, but there is a lot of compelling evidence that says reducing red meat specifically in your diet is really important, both for heart health and things like colorectal cancer prevention. And so I say make sure you're getting a lot of plant-based foods in your diet, whether it's protein sources or not. Make sure you get, if you're malnourished or you're working on muscle gains, including a balanced diet, which also means you could incorporate animal proteins. But limiting red meat, and I'm going to remind everybody in the red meat category, it's not just beef. It's going to be your pork and lamb and bison and that kind of thing as well. Um, so just keep that in mind. And then someone said, I couldn't write down everything. Will the slides or video be made available? And absolutely, yes. We're going to post this for you guys, and we'll let you know probably when that goes out or gets posted. So yes, this will live on Transplant Life. All right. I will hang out and see if there are any more questions that come through. And then if not, we'll plan on ending at the top of the hour. I will take this opportunity to remind you that a survey will be going out after today's presentation, and I would greatly appreciate you taking the time to fill out that survey. Your feedback is so helpful. It's also been dropped into the webinar chat. Thank you. How do you know how much protein you should have? That's a really good question. Usually, when a dietitian is recommending protein, they base it off of your body weight, and usually it's about 0.8 grams per kilogram up to 1 gram per kilogram. And that's really rooted in evidence. So if you can usually go online and find that calculator. It's again, just depends on your body size typically. I will also add the caveat, I don't think anyone here is in that category, but for example, if you're in late stage chronic kidney disease, there are lower protein recommendations. There are definitely negatives to too much protein. Now, the research is unclear if it's everyone or if it's certain people who are already predisposed to kidney injury, but going overboard on protein can be harmful to your kidneys. And that's, again, been shown in the research. You don't really want to go above 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And it is easy to do. Protein is having a moment, right? In terms of protein waters and protein chips. And it's kind of protein overload. The other thing I recognize is the dietary guidelines that were recently released do encourage a higher amount of protein intake. But the research I've seen is most people, one, in the US do get enough protein. And two, there's not value going too high, and again, could be potentially harmful. And of course, it also depends on where you're getting that protein from. Remember, if your protein is coming from a large quantity of red meat, that can be incredibly harmful, not just for saturated fat intake, but again, that colorectal cancer list and other types of cancer as well. So I would say be cautious. All right, guys. So we're at, oh, any tips for breaking the type 1 fun foods? One tip is to do them homemade, make them at home when you indulge. Again, type 1 fun foods like type 1 fun should be in our lives. But, do it in indulgent moments. And again, do it homemade. One example I cut was like the difference between a homemade cupcake and a store-bought cupcake. You're still going to have a lot of added sugar, but you have more control. You can do more sodium. You could add fiber. You can manipulate the sugar. So do it that way. And then also pay attention to frequency and portion control, right? Are you having a small piece of chocolate every day? That's not a big deal. But if you're eating a whole row of cookies in one sitting multiple times a day or once a day, that's probably overdoing it. Is 4 to 6 ounces the average serving size for a female for protein? So the average serving size of protein is about the same for everybody. You're taking about 3 ounces of meat that gets you about 20 grams of protein per serving. 4 to 6 ounces really depends on what type of food you're talking about. Remember, your plant-based foods do offer you protein, but you need a larger serving size to get the equivalent amount. How much protein for a heart transplant really depends on where you are in your transplant journey. And again, that's something I would defer to your clinical care team, who probably has a better picture of your whole health status to advise you on. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and end it here. I'm going to go, again, this will be posted live. If you have questions that you feel like you weren't addressed here, please drop them into the webinar survey and I will work to follow up with you. Although, again, for any sort of individualized treatment recommendations or dietary plans, I am going to refer you out and encourage you to go seek counsel with a registered dietitian who's more familiar with your case. It's been a great pleasure. Stay tuned for updates on following webinars. And in the meantime, happy St. Patrick's Day and thank you for being here. Bye, everyone.